Welcome to Blocksburg 2021. I'm James Harder, if I haven't met you before. And thank you for coming out today. I think we have a really exciting program here for us over the next 4 hours, and I'm really excited to have everyone here. So today we're focusing on all things blockchain that are beyond cryptocurrency, including the federal government applications, healthcare, decentralized manufacturing, and the future of what the technology really holds. I'm excited that our program includes several companies from here in Southwest Virginia too. I think there's a real opportunity for us to probe into what's going on at Region 2 and to hear about some of the things that are happening nationally for blockchain. So like I said, we are really excited to have some companies from Southwest Virginia. We also have a graduate of Virginia Tech, Cesar Tavares from Octo Labs here on our first panel. So we've got some Hokies on our docket here today, and we really have some interesting programming. Just to kind of set the table a little bit about where blockchain is right now. I think we're at a really exciting time for blockchain. You're seeing NFTs, and probably anybody that's interested in technology or computer science or blockchain has fielded some questions about those from some friends or family or something like that. Ethereum and Bitcoin are at record highs. Since, our programming here today has a great opportunity to get into how the federal government is starting to use blockchain, healthcare, decentralized manufacturing, and what the future of that technology holds. So just a couple more front matter things. I just want to do a couple of quick thank yous to some of our financial supporters. I want to give a big thank you to Block One and to Go Virginia, who both fund the work that we do here in the blockchain ecosystem catalyst at Virginia Tech. And I also want to thank several of our partners for helping to coordinate the events. Virginia Tech's Link with Megan Wallace, CPE and Kelly Jobst, our steering committee members like Tim Abbott from Moog, Forrest Collier from Amazon, Victor Ianello from Radiant, John Phillips from the Roanoke Blacksburg Technology Council, Jeff Mitchell from the Mitchell Law Firm, and again, Megan Wallace at Link. I also want to thank some of the people at the Department of Computer Science who've helped to get this event organized. Certainly our department chair, Kyle Ribbons, my boss, Kirk Cameron, and all of the members of the engagement team, especially Haley and Brittany, who are doing some of our dark ops here today. So with that, I think we're ready to kick off session number one. It looks like we got, both of our guys here on it, Jose and Cesar. With that, I'm going to give a quick intro to them, and then I'll start off with a couple of questions and get our discussion going. So our two panelists for this session are Jose Arrieta and Cesar Tavares. Jose was formerly the Chief Information Officer at HHS and the Chief Data Officer at HHS. He is also an adjunct professor at the Carey Business School at Johns Hopkins. So welcome, Jose. And Cesar Tavares, who is the Senior Director of Technology and Innovation at Octo Labs. And as I mentioned earlier, is a graduate of Virginia Tech, I believe class of 2000, if I have that right. So welcome to you both. And what this conversation is to talk a little bit about their partnership managing blockchain within the operations of the federal government. So welcome, Jose and Cesar. We'll start off by telling us a little bit about the partnership and how you got that started and how the management of that worked as you thought about adopting blockchain in HHS.
First of all, it's an honor to be here. Cesar, good to see you, if only virtually again. I think that the one thing that I would start with whenever you're talking about blockchain in a large kind of enterprise setting is you have to first respect and understand the fact that it is a fundamental shift to the way an organization does business. And so obviously, when you pick an industry partner, it's very important to understand that they understand some of the change management challenges that go along with working in an organization like that. And this is what I mean. Most enterprises, whether they're a business or whether they're a federal agency, all of their processes are built around business processes that validate whatever it is that they're doing. And one of the things that you're really doing when you implement blockchain technology is you're decentralizing the need for validation, and you're trying to create a higher level of integrity and trust between individuals that are exchanging data, as an example. And so The first thing that you have to understand if you're going to implement these technologies, whether it's in a market or an agency or an organization, a business organization, is the fact that you're fundamentally changing the way that that organization works. Because these middle functions that are process oriented and built to check for integrity, to validate that the activities occurring, are actually occurring in a manner that align with the policy of that organization no longer matter. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing, from an industry partner perspective, the financial model associated with kind of how profit and losses are generated if you're the provider of a managed service that is implementing something like blockchain technology, becomes very different. And I want to spend a minute there because I think it's really important. So if you look across the implementations of blockchain technology, they tend to fly in the face of kind of the standard business practice around making money off of data assets. So you look at large organizations, whether it's Facebook or Google, really any large organization, Amazon. One of the things that they're able to do is they're able to leverage the data insights that they have in their supply chain, in their search capabilities, and they're able to use that to create a monetary value for them as a large organization to deliver a better value to customers. One of the interesting things about implementing blockchain technology is the financial model for how you generate profit and how you book a loss fundamentally changes. You are now, in the case of HHS, you are now distributing data to an endpoint, whether that's a human being or a machine endpoint, and you're giving them the authority, the power, the control to actually share that data across a very large ecosystem. So from an industry partner perspective, the financial model changes. One of the examples that I always give, and I'll pass it over to Cesar here in a second, but one of the examples that I always give is if you ever watch kind of lions hunt a zebra in Africa, and they typically don't kill it right away. They chase it and wait till it gets tired, and then they kill it and they eat it. Right, a group of lions. Many of the large kind of platforms that facilitate business right now have the ability to do that. They can allow a company to grow to 100 or 200 million in revenue. They're the portal that connects the company with their individual clients. They probably have really good supply chain capabilities depending on how large they are. And then they can look at that market and they can use their strength in the supply chain function, and they maybe can create an equivalent offering that that company is currently offering. Let's say it's a hat or a shirt. They can really drive down the pricing. What blockchain allows you to do is allow businesses to actually pay into an ecosystem where they can subscribe to a secure ability to grow their business, to control their data, to choose who they share their data with. And they're more or less operating on a subscription basis, and they're paying for the ability to have control of their data, to secure it, and to choose who they share it with. And if that's a human endpoint, maybe that's I go to the physician's office and I consent to sharing data, and it creates a monetary value for the fact, and I just created a monetary value for the fact that I agreed to share data with a research company that's focused on creating vaccines. And now you're connecting the individual directly with a monetary revenue stream. So those are some of the fundamental kind of challenges that you have to mentally prepare for. So if you're leading the effort within an agency, an organization, you are disrupting the way that organization does business end to end, and you're getting rid of a lot of functional needs that have been in place for a number of years. And there are people that work in those jobs that are going to need to be reskilled. If you're a business, the ability to generate a profit has now shifted, and the business model of generating a profit has now shifted. It's no longer about being able to analyze large data sets as it relates to an individual. It's about data sharing. It's about creating security and enablement of data sharing. And I think that those two things are really important, right? And then if you're an individual interacting within that ecosystem, you've now been empowered and you have the intellectual capability to use the data asset that you're creating in any way that you want. Right. So if you look at those kind of three key points of reference, and there's many others, but I think those are the three starting points, you're fundamentally changing the existence of the customer, the patient, if it's a healthcare company, the managed service provider, the company that's facilitating and creating the ecosystem, and then the organization as a whole, which has probably operated the way it currently operates for the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. And you're getting rid of some of those functional kind of capabilities. So if you're not keeping those three things in mind and you're not managing towards the change management challenges associated with those three things, you're going to run into some significant challenges when you implement. So yeah, I'll pause there, Cesar. I'm sure that you have a different kind of view of this, but I think it's really important from a table setting perspective to just kind of understand that those are 3 points of reference that you should always be aware of. It's kind of like, when I used to coach basketball, right? It's kind of like, are the refs calling walk today's, or are they calling a lot of hacking fouls, right? How is our man-to-man defense, right? It's kind of just repeatedly going through and checking in on stakeholders within your ecosystem to understand how this change is going to impact them.
Yeah, that was an awesome intro, Jose. So appreciate that. Um, yeah, Jose talked about, fundamentally how, the implications in the federal space, what implications that blockchain will have to that technology. But I believe to sort of demonstrate and test those things, that you need somebody innovative and willing to push the boundaries. And I think that's exactly what you did at HHS, which, I became really lucky because I got the opportunity to actually go in and demonstrate the capability that blockchain has, right? The problem that it solves. And ultimately, as Jose mentioned, that problem is really around trust, right? So if you think of an ecosystem, if you think of a group of players, or a group of entities, peers, whatever you want to call it, transacting amongst each other, if you don't have trust within that ecosystem, inevitably what you have to do to enable trust is build these intermediaries, right? You have to build some sort of auditing function, some sort of mechanism to enable trust within that ecosystem. Unfortunately, those types of mechanisms are very costly, right? So think of data reconciliation. So you have, either, between agencies, or even within the same agency, if, one entity has a database and they transact, and the other entity, also has a database, but they don't trust the previous entity, so they have to audit to make sure that the transactions meet up, right? So inevitably, you're duplicating these data entry points, and you're having folks having to like double check each other, and that's really costly in a federal space, specifically, right? So the particular problem that Jose was tackling at the time was, he had a mandate from government agency to provide these uh, continuous diagnostics and mitigation reports. Basically, what those were every agency has to send a report. I believe is to DHS, to demonstrate that they have a good security posture, right? So there's this report that says, "Hey, we've audited our agency. Here's our report, and this tells us where we are from a security standpoint." So in order to do that, you have to audit. You have to audit your system, essentially. And if anyone that's ever done an audit on a network knows that you get all your information from your log files, right? Because your log files record what actually happened on that network. And so, the challenge they were having was that these log files were either being deleted because of retention policies. Log files get really big, so you have to clean them out every so often. But if you clean them out before someone's had the opportunity to do an audit, then you're out of luck there, right? You also had issues where the wrong people had access to those files, so they can inadvertently delete a file or change a file. And then you also had, weird things like, like a power outage that could corrupt a file. So there are all these different things that were making it really difficult for auditors to truly determine what happened on the network, what happened on the system, right? So what we decided to do is, hey, why don't, we're not going to change anything. We're not going to, um, you know, do some, 5-year long development project to solve this problem. We came in and within 3 months, we put together a blockchain network that basically captured all the transactions, on the network from a logging standpoint. It told you when a log was deleted, by who was it deleted, when a log was changed, by who changed it, and so on and so forth. And so one of the things we did is we met with, the auditors themselves, because blockchain's a really difficult concept to grasp. And so we believe that having a really good, um, design, a really good UI UX approach, is key here, because seeing is believing, right? And I think Jose really emphasized that the technology is really hard to grasp, but if you make it such that anybody can just log into an application and understand what's going on fundamentally, then it would make the use case go along that much easier. So we met with the auditors, understood their needs, and we built this blockchain network that basically captured log information, and that was a tool that they used to then audit their system. And what that did for them is, I talked to one particular auditor, and they said, listen, I spent the last 4 to 5 months doing a deep dive on all these network log files, and honestly, I can't tell you whether there was a power outage or if we were hacked by some nefarious actor, right? So, and not only that, that it was just one little file, right, that they spent 4 months trying to figure out what the heck's happened on the network. And so with our solution, that the 4 months went down to 4 days, right? So now they actually had a true trusted, validation, record that they can feel confident in being able to do the audit and understanding what happened on their network. So that was a use case. It was a lot of fun doing, and Jose's leadership, pushing the envelope and really trusting the technology, and I thought was a lot of fun, and it was a lot of success as well. So that
I
was
want, I want to spend a second and highlight why what Caesar said is important. So let's say you have a house, right? And the house has 1 million points of entry. Okay. Like that's that's a network like HHS. There's 1 million doors and windows where you can send data in, you can send data out. We do $800 billion in research funding around the world. Okay. So how would somebody try to break into your house? Well, they would go through one of the doors or windows. So how does that happen from a cybersecurity perspective? And by the way, the numbers that I'm going to give you relate to a couple of real events. I'm not going to give you the exact numbers, but this happens to every major company, JP Morgan Chase, you name it. So how do you get into the house? You go and you check all the windows and doors to see if they're unlocked, right? Well, every time you log into your computer and you go to like the Washington Post or whatever newspaper you read at 9 a.m., it creates an IP packet. And what adversaries will do is they'll copy it and they'll push it back at all the doors and windows in your house at a very high level of velocity, right? Now, if you have an endpoint digital identifier for everybody that you interact with on the network that's secure, that's immutable, that establishes trust and identity, then you know that whomever is trying to access your network is somebody that you interact with on a regular basis. And if you can do that in real time, you can off ramp all that traffic that is trying to create access to your network. So we had an experience at HHS where each of our windows and doors in our house were knocked on 20,000 times a second for about 18 hours. So over 7 billion attempts to actually enter the network, embed, create an identity, and take data. What data were they hunting for? I don't know, like maybe the code to make the COVID-19 vaccine, because there's a pretty large financial windfall associated with, being able to steal that without doing any of the research. I don't know, maybe data on US citizens. HHS has data on probably 2/3 of all the citizens in this nation, and touches every single person that lives in this nation at one point in their life throughout their life journey. That's very valuable. So our approach was to use blockchain technology to create digital identifiers for all the data flowing through for each endpoint. And so that we could actually start to analyze all that data and get an understanding if it was nefarious or a research organization in South Africa that we regularly exchanged data and information in, right? That's empowering. And to the question on, you've emphasized blockchain requires fundamental changes. Why will companies pursue this? They'll pursue this because they can lower cost. And so here's the thing. If you want to become an autonomous, data-driven, AI-powered organization, if you want to execute at the edge, all right, what organizations want to do that? I don't know, companies that are building self-driving cars, companies that are enabling drones to independently interact with one another, leveraging machine learning. These are industries of the future. Would you like to go to a doctor's office and consent to sharing data and be compensated for sharing that data? Do you think that if you receive some form of compensation every time you visited Dr. A versus Dr. B, which doctor do you think that you'd go and visit more often? So why companies are investing in blockchain technologies, it significantly lowers your fixed cost from a delivery perspective, because you're cutting out a part of your business and you're enabling direct contact with the consumer. And I'll give you one really good example. L'Oreal did this in a country in Europe as a proof of concept, and it's very fascinating. What do you think the biggest cost is in developing makeup? It's R&D. And there are people that do R&D. What if you could do R&D by directly connecting your customer with a supply chain? What if I could say, I like red lipstick? What if I could say, I like certain types of eyeshadows and certain colors, and I could directly interact with the supply chain and have that product shipped to me? And then I could socially share that across a network of folks that buy L'Oreal products, uh, to see if there were critical mass and interest in that product in particular. Would that lower your cost of doing business? Absolutely. The cost of R&D for L'Oreal is something like 70% of the total cost. That is a fundamental shift. And that's why you see companies investing in blockchain technology. They want to become autonomous. They want to become data-driven. They want to create more intimacy with the endpoint, whether it's a customer or it's a research entity that's trying to gain access to your network. And they want to be able to validate the identity of that endpoint, whether it's a research institute or me as a customer trying to buy makeup, for my sister, which I know nothing about makeup, so that probably wouldn't go well. But that's why people use um, uh, blockchain technology. Is it hard to do an audit? And can anyone join the network? In our case, we were using proof of authority, meaning we know the research institutes that we provide funding to. We're not trying to facilitate anonymous interactions. We're trying to create a digital identifier for that institution so that we can confirm that data and interactions from that institution are coming from that institution versus being spoofed from a third party. So can anyone join the network? In our case, no. It was folks that we were doing business with. It was folks that we were transacting with. We knew who they were. We can we can check with the IRS to get an understanding if they are an entity that legally has the ability to do business or do research with a US entity. From a contribution perspective, we were not using proof of work or proof of stake. We were using proof of authority, and we were using the immutable record itself to create digital identifiers for anything that was entering or egressing our ecosystem, right? And that's a very different model. So your power costs are significantly lower. You still get the benefit of decentralization. Are you a full functioning Bitcoin-like blockchain? No, you're not. You're not, because you're using um, and doing business with entities that you know exist, and you're not solving the problem of trading with an anonymous partner. You're solving the problem of creating an identifier for a partner that you know that you regularly trade with, to ensure that somebody else doesn't try to behave and interact with you as if they were that partner, and take valuable information that was really meant to be between that partner and the centralized entity. And I want to kind of point out one more thing that may make this come to life, because when you talk about it from a cyber perspective, it gets really murky, right? So I'm going to go back to the health example. So right now, my DNA is made up of a lot of things, and I'm not a doctor, but I'm just going to throw out a couple, right? Proteomics and metabolics, right? They're a part of the genetic structure of a human being. And I can do an analysis of your metabolic makeup, proteomic makeup, and I can determine, some things that if you have certain markers, genetic markers that may put you at risk if you get COVID. That data exists within NIH. If you're a scientist and you want to analyze that data and start to create proprietary genetic markers for predisposition to something like COVID, you can do that and you can receive NIH funding to do that work. But how do you share that proprietary data securely? How do you couple that proprietary data with Cesar's lifestyle information that he inputs into an application like Noom? Because even though he's already in great shape, he's married to a woman from Latin America just like me, and they constantly tell you have to lose weight. So she bought him a subscription to Noom. He started answering the questions in Noom. Those are lifestyle questions to help him lose a few pounds. Now you can take the proprietary genetic markers that a bioscience company on the West Coast created. You can take the lifestyle insights that Cesar consented to sharing and created a store of monetary value for himself. And let's say he took a genetic test so we could get a real understanding of the genetic markers that he is predisposed to. Within a secure network, you can bring those 3 different data sets together. Each of those companies that are doing the work, Noom to kind of get Cesar in shape, help him shed a few pounds, make his wife happy. The genetic marker work that had nothing to do with Cesar, but it was just identifying metabolics that predisposes an individual to really negative effects from COVID-19. And Cesar's genetic test, which he took, that shows what he is predisposed to as an individual. Each of those parties can be compensated. That data can be shared in an anonymous fashion, meaning we can provide the indicator for Cesar. We can provide an indicator of his lifestyle, and we can analyze it based on the aggregate data insights from the proprietary genetic markers that were created by the bioscience company. And a physician can sit down with Cesar and can guide him to becoming more healthy. So if in the worst case he gets COVID-19, he is mentally prepared, he is physically prepared to deal with the issue. That's the type of capability that enables, and that type of data sharing at scale with security and being able to create digital identifiers for those endpoints so that everybody can receive some monetary benefit for the work that they're putting in to make Cesar more healthy. That is something that blockchain technology enables. And that is something that is absolutely necessary for the future of healthcare in this nation. I want to kind of just say one other thing, because I think it's really important. Blockchain is just a protocol that exists in a technology stack. It is not the technology stack, and you're still going to need cloud technologies. You're still going to need visualization capabilities and some type of platform to get an understanding of what's going on in your ecosystem, right? But if you're going to build a capability that is meant to create autonomous, data-driven, AI-powered health decisions, if you're going to build that, then from a business perspective, you're going to have to eliminate egress costs. You're going to have to drive down your storage costs, and you want access to all of the data within your ecosystem, right? And you're going to have to drive down your tier 3 support costs for any cloud capability that you're going to use to actually run the protocol, which creates the digital identifiers for each of the entities behaving within that ecosystem, and to create the SaaS application layer, let's say, on top of it, so that you have visibility into what's actually happening in a patient-centered view, right? So it fundamentally changes how you do business. Now, when you go to negotiate with your cloud provider, hey, I need you to zero out egress. I need you to minimize storage, provide universal flash storage offering. And we need to automate as much of the tier 3 support as possible. Why? Because we are now a data sharing entity. We are not centralizing everything in one commercial cloud environment. That is a fundamental shift for the way a lot of organizations buy cloud, right? That is enabling the endpoint. It's enabling the bioscience company. It's enabling Noom. It's enabling Cesar's wife to get him healthy. It's enabling that genetic test kit, and it's powering the individual and putting everything around the individual, which is a very different business model, right? So I think that's really important, and I hope that example kind of brings it to life a little bit, because anytime Cesar starts talking about cybersecurity, I just think back to the George Lucas Star Wars movies and all the lasers shooting through space at whatever the plane that C-3PO was in, flying around the galaxy, right? But that's what it empowers itself. So I'll kind of pause there. I don't know if there's other questions from you, James, or maybe from the audience, or Cesar, if there's kind of a point you want to hammer in on.
Well, there was one
Um,
thread that I wanted to pick, or Cesar, if you had something to say, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say it's like you know, uh, Jose, you're hitting on something about me getting in, or my wife wanting me to get in shape because she bought a one of those NordiTrack rowers, and it's taking up half the basement. And so anyway, so you're right, spot on that. James, go ahead, man.
Sure. So one of the things I think that's interesting about applying this in the federal space is you're dealing with elected leaders, people at the kind of top of these bureaucratic organizations that may not be very familiar with the technology. And when we were doing the prep for this interview, a quote that I really loved from, I believe it was you, was talking about we're really trying to show the art of the possible. And I wondered if you could maybe talk about what that resistance was like from the kind of political domain. And then also if Cesar, if you wanted to talk a little bit about what are some of the things that you've shown that gain some traction with people who may not understand much about blockchain, but they started to kind of see the Lego click into place and say, oh gosh, I finally understand this is what we're doing here. This is why this tool is necessary and useful.
Yeah, I think that first of all, you're not selling blockchain technology. So from a political perspective, having tried it, I did an implementation of this at an agency called GSA. It was a small proof of concept. Then we did a larger implementation at HHS that was given a security authority to operate. And then we did the cybersecurity implementation with Cesar and the Octo team on the endpoints themselves. And then we actually used it in the pandemic response. And I think over that maybe 18-month or 2-year journey, time just escapes me, but it didn't seem like it was that long. What we learned is you don't lead with selling blockchain technology. You lead with a set of business objectives that you want to power. And I kind of laid out some from a cost perspective, but I'm going to give you an example of another one. So I think the lesson learned is you don't lead with trying to educate people on blockchain. You lead with the business model that you can enable. And if blockchain is a part of what the capabilities that you need to enable that business model, and somebody asks about it, then you go ahead and you explain it. So I think that's the first lesson learned. I want to give you kind of 1 or 2 examples specifically related to the pandemic response. And I just want to couch this by saying that none of what I'm going to say is going to use actual data, and I am not referencing the actual states where these interactions occurred. I'm highlighting an example, but these interactions did occur, and I want you to kind of see it. So during the pandemic response, we had to build a public health surveillance system in a period of about 5 days from April 5th to April 10th that collected data from all 50 states, all 6 territories, 15,000 nursing homes, and 6,200 hospitals, right? And what that required is 8 different technologies: an identity, authentication, and access management technology, a secure file transfer capability, a data ingest, parsing, curation, and sharing engine, a mapping technology. We needed something like DocuSign because we had to agree to data sharing with maybe 25, 30 companies, that some of which that were publicly traded in the United States, right? And then a supervised machine learning layer, because we only had about 30 million tests a month to distribute for the totality of the United States. We wanted to be targeted and predictive as to where we distributed those tests to drive down the spread of COVID, right? In collecting data from states, one of the challenges you run into is folks saying, hey, the federal government manipulated the data. That's not the information that we sent to the federal government. So you get that type of feedback from states. So I'm going to give you one example. We had a state that went to the press and said, federal government's manipulating the data from our hospitals. For example, in our state, there's only 200 hospitals. There's not 230 hospitals. And that was really important in the middle of the pandemic. The reason it was important is because remdesivir, which was a therapeutic to treat COVID, was distributed on the basis of some indicators from the hospitals and the total number of hospitals in the state. So if you had a lot of incidences and you had very little hospitals, there was going to be or a lot of hospitals, there was a calculation made and remdesivir was allocated on that basis, right? Just think of it that way. So this state went to the press, and I'm talking like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, and said the federal government's manipulating the data. And they sent a letter to the president. And of course, that letter rolled down to my organization. But we were functioning on a blockchain. So we called the organization and we said, why are you saying that we manipulated the numbers? And they said, there's only 200 hospitals in our state. There's not 230. And we said, oh, that's funny, because what's going on with those other 30 hospitals? And they said, they're all closed. They're no longer functioning in our state. And we said, oh, really? That's funny, because they submit data to our system every single day. And I've never met an organization that wants to be regulated once it's closed. And when you have an immutable record that can show a series of interactions and transactions with a digital endpoint, in this case, like a hospital system, that's a game, set, match argument. Maybe the state should invest more in creating visibility into what's happening within their state. And I'm going to give you kind of one more example. We had another state that said, hey, the numbers are a mess. Your system is reporting that we have 10,000 hospitals and we only have 100. How the heck did that happen? We can't trust this system. And we said, oh, before you go to the press, we just want to let you know that we have these log files and we put them on a blockchain so they're immutable. And we also want to let you know that the individual that provided the data for your state logged into the system twice on Sunday and submitted the same data set twice. And the second time he logged in, he backdated the data set by 5 days. It's an immutable log file. We're not making up that he entered the system. We're not making up that he submitted the data set twice. So the reason the numbers are inaccurate is because of your business process. Now, if you really want to have a public discourse on CNN about this, let us know. We'll happily make the log files available to everybody, and we'll just have to explain, how do we fix the process so we don't have an error of someone logging in and providing data 2 times, which clearly makes the numbers inaccurate, right? That is a very powerful reason why you need a technology like this. I'm going to give you kind of one more example. Imagine if when you register, has anybody registered for a COVID vaccine? I can get out my wallet, I don't know where it is, and I have my little card that says I was vaccinated. Man, how long do you think that card's going to last in my wallet? I have 2 kids. Probably not that long. Can you imagine if I had an immutable digital record of my COVID vaccine that existed on an app on my phone so that I could use it to get into Yankee Stadium and I could use it to get on an airplane? How empowering would that be? But I would need what? A digital identifier that is immutable and related to me as an individual, where I could store that record. 100% unchangeable. Instead of that little dinky card that I'm carrying around in my wallet that I could write anything on and nobody would know the difference. Anytime I want to go into CVS and maybe get a 3rd shot, which I would never do because the first 2 shots were tiring enough. But my point is that's why the business case for this technology is so important. If you can get out of thinking about it from a Bitcoin perspective, and as Cesar said, start to think about it from an integrity and trust perspective.
I'd just like to add the other thing that's attractive from a, federal agency standpoint was the fact that, like, we didn't go with a rip and replace approach. This is really what we said is, hey, we're going to give you a recording device for all intents and purposes that has a one-way track. You can't go back and delete anything. It's just continually recording transactions. The other thing too is we didn't, with blockchain, because it's a distributed database, if you will, there's no centralized authority or rather there's no central infrastructure that you need to purchase. You don't have to create this new silo where you have to have somebody responsible building out all this incredible infrastructure. What you basically say is, hey, you want to be part of this network, create your own node and plug into the network, right? So the infrastructure itself is distributed and the cost is much smaller because it's incurred by whatever agency or entity wants to join that network. So the database is distributed, as is the cost. The cost is incurred at a much smaller scale by each one of these peers. And then thirdly, the other thing that, you know, Jose hit upon several times is really that, you know, the blockchain is a future technology. You know, I believe that it's going to make, you know, large waves in the future. You're already starting to see some of that with you know, Bitcoin and some of the other cryptocurrencies. But I think, you know, the other technology that's very much in line to make huge waves in the future is artificial intelligence, AI, right? And so I think, or rather, blockchain will be almost like the DNA for AI, because AI needs data, right? And data needs to be trusted. And if you cannot trust the data, then what good is your AI, right? So blockchain is very much going to be in line with sort of artificial technology, because it'll be the DNA, it'll be that foundational technology that'll help excel both of these, you know, yeah,
I want
capabilities.
to I want to spend a second on the AI point, Cesar. It's a really it's a really important kind of piece of insight that you provided. Um, I'm reading the I was reading the question. So I just want to spend a second there because I think it's a really important point. If you pause for a second and you think about the human brain, right? And I used to have this. I used to talk about this all the time, and I don't remember it as well, but it was drawn on my board when I used to work in an actual building. The human brain like stores memory in 5 different locations, right? So let's say you're on a street corner in New York City and you're buying one of those hot dogs and like there's a shooting right in front of you, right? So most likely because it's a traumatic event, you're going to have a memory of the smell of the hot dog. You're probably going to have the loud noise from the gunshots. You're going to have a memory associated with what you heard, right? And then you're going to have this feeling, and your brain stores the memory associated with that feeling of fear, the smell of the hot dog, and what you heard. It stores it in different parts of your brain. Now, any one of those type of activities, the smell of a hot dog 10 years later, when you're walking down a street in New York City, a loud noise that maybe sounds like the gunshot when you're walking through outside of a stadium in Chicago after a Cubs game, right? Any one of those can trigger those memories within the human brain, so that you immediately go back to that traumatic moment on the basis of what you heard, what you smelled, maybe what you're feeling at an existing moment. So when Cesar talks about blockchain as being the DNA for artificial intelligence, what I just described to you in the human brain is really the basis of intelligence, the ability to store that memory in a different location based on a sense that exists associated with the human being. And then kind of automate a response. You hear a loud noise or you smell a hot dog 10 years after this traumatic event, and you're immediately running down the street because it triggered a memory in an automated way to trigger a response to protect you as an individual. So when he talks about blockchain as being the DNA, it is the fabric that allows for that learned behavior, whether it's good or bad, to actually occur. And that's what you need if you want to execute and do artificial intelligence. A self-driving car is a great example. Um, I think that the data from the medical data question. I know we have a couple questions, Cesar, so make sure we go back to them. I'm just going to take the last one because it's easiest to read while I'm talking. We're not storing all the data on the blockchain. We're creating an identifier, right? I'm at a hot dog stand, somebody gets shot in front of me. The smell of the hot dog and the traumatic event itself is stored in 2 different parts of my brain. We're creating an immutable record of that activity, of the fact that something happened on the blockchain, and we're actually storing the data in different types of databases with a digital identifier that's connected directly to the blockchain so that the immutable record of what has occurred cannot be changed. And we're storing the data off chain itself because the chain would run really slow. So what you're doing is you're adding another layer of security from a medical data perspective. You're adding a digital identifier from a identity perspective that can be unchanged. and you're not storing it in and of itself on the blockchain so that you have control to consent to actually sharing that data versus providing it into a third party that's going to store it for you. So I think that level of granularity, it can be as granular as you want, but what the blockchain is really doing is creating that secure, encrypted digital identifier, digital layer, so that you have a mechanism on a public private key infrastructure to actually access that data with the consent of Cesar, who says, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share that with Jose. And I've validated that he is in fact a provider based on the digital identity that he's established on the network, and that he's a doctor that's going to be able to help treat me. And I'm only going to share targeted pieces of information that he actually needs to do his job. So that's kind of functionally, to Rebecca's question, that's kind of functionally how it works. Cesar, you want to jump in on some of the other questions there?
Yeah, I'll let maybe James maybe determine what question
Yeah,
he'd
I was
like.
going to say, I think we have probably one last one in us here for a couple minutes. I'm interested in the one that talks a little bit about how long do you think it's going to take before some of these things become a bit more mainstreamed? And let's narrow it down to in the federal government. I think that's kind of where's the future of this heading in the federal space. Do you think there is some excitement about it? And how widespread do you think something like this might be able to be adopted in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, Jose and myself maybe have different viewpoints on this. You know, I, in the commercial sector, there's more, how do I say this? There's more fluctuation and there's more of a buffer there to make mistakes, right? So when when Google makes a mistake, sometimes the industry looks at it as like, oh, wasn't that neat? Wasn't that innovative? Or Google sucks. Whatever it may be, right? When the federal government makes a mistake, people die, right? So it's the difference is starking, right? So that said, in the federal space, they take more of a conservative approach to um, you know, bringing in new technology. But you need folks that push the limit, like folks like Jose, that really begin to educate them and get them sort of prepared for the next wave of these technical capabilities, right, that are going to revolutionize the world, in my opinion. I do think that even in the commercial side, I believe blockchain is still a few years out before it becomes quote unquote mainstream. What is what is undoubtedly true, in my opinion, my humble opinion, is that it's here to stay, right? The fundamental technology, it's here to stay. I think we will see it evolve over the next 10 to 20 years. But fundamentally, it's here to stay. When will the market really, adapt it? I don't know. I would say from a commercial standpoint, anywhere between 5 to 10 years. A federal standpoint, maybe even a little bit longer than that. That's just my opinion. But Jose, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already, I mean, I think probably something like 75% of the transactions that occur in the United States touch a blockchain at some point in time. So I think commercially, it's already kind of a part of the DNA of IT systems. I mean, I think that the real opportunity is how it's used and the new business models that are created from it. And I think when you look at some of the quantum optimization capabilities that exist in the market, and some of the and how the costs associated with compute have been just continuously going down, I think there's a real opportunity to create new business models. In terms of the federal adoption of it, it was used in the pandemic response for the largest population health surveillance system in the history of the world. It was also used to create a public-private key infrastructure to create digital identifiers for individuals registering vaccines across the United States. That ultimately was not used by when we created it and secured it. The Warp Speed team decided not to use it, but it became the basis of the baseline infrastructure for the public health passport that Salesforce, Microsoft, and Oracle have partnered on and been very public about. The Department of Fiscal Services actually has two pretty large proof of concepts, one for mobile devices and another for financial transactions associated with grants functioning within their ecosystem. So it's not full adoption, but I think it's functioning. And I think if you look at activities in space and the way sensor endpoints on satellites need to coordinate and share data with one another, and large scale mesh networks, if an organization like an army wants to become a autonomous data driven AI powered organization, they're already working with blockchain protocols within cloud infrastructures to create that ability to allow for interactions between human and machine endpoints, both human to human, human to machine type of interactions, all powered by some variation of a blockchain protocol. It may not be the same as what you see when you look at the Bitcoin network itself, but functionally it is the same. So I think that the adoption will gradually occur. I think it's already occurring within the ecosystem, and I think the 3 to 5 year question is, who's going to build the next Microsoft or the next Google or whatever the company's name off of blockchain technology. That's when everybody will recognize it as mainstream, but it's already being used across multiple ecosystems and domains, and it's touching each and every one of you that are on this call at this moment.
All right. Well, I think since we're a little over time, we're going to leave the discussion there. But I want to finish by thanking Cesar and Jose for being a part of Blocksburg 2021. This was a great discussion, and thank you both. And a couple of quick administrative things. Everyone is staying on this call, and all of the attendees can just stay here. We'll be going again here at 10 o'clock. The next session is going to be talking about Archive Core and acceleration and their use of blockchain and health domain. So stick around for that next session. I'll see you in about 5 minutes.